Hello, this is Rebecca Rhodes. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create this realistic dog's eye in watercolor. The full step-by-step video is available now in my online school. The subject is based on a reference photo of this beagle in the public domain. I'll start by lightly outlining the iris with a gray mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, watery in consistency. I do this early in the painting to maintain the shape of the iris once deeper colors are applied. Use just a bit of watery gray on the tip of the damp brush and apply wet on dry with a gentle touch. As the gray is drying, I'll apply the lightest colors underneath the fur using yellow ochre and ultramarine blue. Directly underneath the eye is an area that will be gray and black, and there's a bluish hue. Maybe it's the reflection of the sky. I'm applying ultramarine blue, a watery consistency. I switched to a bigger brush to apply the yellow ochre around the iris. This is going anywhere that will have brown fur. It's a pale, watery consistency. Create a thicker yellow on the palette, the consistency of cream in your coffee or tea, and apply to the darker parts around the eye. I switched back to the smaller brush and I'm touching in the color and blending with the damp brush. This shape next to the inner eye will eventually be black, one of the darkest parts of the eye. Next, I'll apply yellow in the iris. This iris will be brown, but when you apply yellow first, it enhances the richness of those browns to come. This is Winsor Lemon, the consistency of whole milk. Pick up a bit on your damp brush and place it over the entire iris, wet on dry, working around that white highlight. Cover the entire iris evenly with this yellow and allow it to dry completely. Apply the lightest brown to the iris. That yellow will shine through the brown like a stained glass window. This is burnt sienna, a watery to milky consistency. Apply this burnt sienna wet on dry to the upper eye and where the pupil will be, working around the highlight. While the color's wet, pull that brown gently into the lower eye. While damp, touch in more burnt sienna to the darkest browns in the upper eye, the area of the pupil, the outer eye, and along the edge of the iris. Continue to gently coax the brown into the lower eye. I want the darkest browns to be even deeper in intensity, so I'm touching in more burnt sienna while the iris is damp and gently blending. As the iris dries, I'll begin to build the darks around the eye. I'll start by reinforcing the black area underneath the eye. This is a gray mix of ultramarine blue with a bit of burnt sienna, more blue than brown and watery in consistency. Apply this gray wet on dry to what will be the darkest part of this shape underneath the eye. While damp, I'm touching in more gray to deepen the color. This gray looks different when applied to the shape to the left of the inner eye due to that yellow ochre underneath. Deepen the gray with further applications and blend outward in the direction of the fur. Continue to the shape at the outer corner of the eye, which will also be black, and blend in the direction of the fur. The beginnings of the darkest parts around the eye have been established, and I'll move to the darker browns of the iris. First, I'm lifting out a bit of brown to reveal some yellow. Use a damp brush to wet the pigment and gently lift out color. As this dries, I'll create a chocolatey brown on the palette, darker than the previous brown, by adding a touch of ultramarine blue to that burnt sienna. This is a milky consistency. Gently dampen the entire iris with water. Touch it in and guide the water around the iris. working around that white highlight. Allow the water to soak in. Touch the tip of the brush to the paper to release the brown. The color will spread as long as the paper's damp. Touch in more dark brown with the tip of the brush while the iris is damp. Pick up straight burnt sienna from the palette, a milky consistency, and touch it right into the edge of the darker brown and allow it to mix and spread. The underpainting, or the color underneath the fur, has been established, and I'll introduce the fur markings using burnt sienna, a watery consistency. With light flicks of the brush, apply the hair, creating uneven lengths and following the contour of the fur markings. I've switched to a darker brown for these markings. The texture underneath the eye is a bit different. Apply shapes with the side of the brush. Moving back to the iris, I'll put in the darkest color that will become the pupil and also the dark parts around the iris. Create a black mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, but make it mostly blue, the consistency of cream that you put in your coffee or tea. It's going to look blue on the palette. Gently dampen the iris with water, working around that white highlight. Allow the water to soak in so the iris is damp, but the water's not puddling. Pick up a bit of the black mix on the tip of the brush and just touch the brush to the paper, starting in the center where the pupil will be. Notice that what looks blue on the palette looks black on the paper due to the browns underneath. Use that black to create the lines of the lower lid. I'll use that same black on this shape next to the inner eye. It will become one of the darkest shapes of this eye, and it has a hard edge, so there's no blending. Continue to the upper eyelid, and then to the right of the iris. Apply tiny fur markings in the upper eyelid to create texture and balance the value so the lid's not too light. I'm applying darker fur markings along the inner eye, and once again I'm reinforcing that black shape. Now that the darks have been reinforced, I'll apply a glaze over that bigger black shape to the left of the inner eye. This is a watery mix of that black, still more blue than brown in the mix. Use that watery black to create texture in the darker areas underneath the eye. Deepen the black fur markings along the right side of the eye. Little by little, it's going darker. It's time to unify values and smooth the markings with watery glazes. I'm using burnt sienna, a watery consistency, to place glazes of color over the fur, starting with the darkest shapes. Apply gently and blend into the area around the shape. This is burnt sienna, a milky consistency. Apply to the darkest shapes and blend in a direction of the fur. Allow this to dry completely. And now for the final details. I see a bit too much black in parts of the iris. To remedy this, touch the pigment with the damp brush and gently lift out some black to reveal the color underneath. Pick up burnt sienna, the consistency of whole milk, and apply wet on dry to parts of the iris. Pick up a bit of watery ultramarine blue on the tip of the brush and touch some color into the highlight to emulate the reflection of the blue sky. Now to reinforce the darkest parts again. This is straight ultramarine blue. It will look black on the paper due to the color underneath. Reinforce the darkest parts of the pupil, just touching in the color with the tip of the brush. With that same blue, create longer, darker hairs in the upper left of the eye. Deepen the black shape to the right of the eye. Reinforce these longer black hairs coming out of the inner shape. When the darks are deepened, it's necessary to balance other areas, and it's back to the shape below the eye to reinforce these values. Apply a bit more burnt sienna inside the iris. Deepen the black of the inner eye with a gentle glaze, a watery application. The upper eye could use a deeper brown. I created a mix of darker brown with the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Gently touch it into the upper iris, wet on dry. I'm lifting out a bit of brown by touching this area with the damp brush to reveal some yellow. Just a bit more depth to this dark shape below the eye and blend. And this eye study is finished. If you found this video helpful and wish to go more in depth, please visit my website where you can sign up to view this step-by-step tutorial in real time and learn more about painting realistic watercolors. Thanks for watching.